thanks to all of you for coming. This is a particularly a good time to talk to President Alexander Stubb. As I think everybody here knows, he, in addition to being President of Finland, former Prime Minister, former Finance Minister, was a former member of the national golf team, and in part through his intimidatingly good golf game. He told me about a minute ago that he hits his drives about 300 yards off the tee. He has become a particularly close friend among foreign leaders of President Trump, and has an insight into President Trump that is special, and we're going to hope to draw on that this afternoon. So let me begin with the subject that is on everybody's mind, I mean, obsessively almost, and that is Greenland. Who would have thought that would dominate Davos 2026? But it obviously does. You said over the weekend that you feared that the tariffs that President Trump has proposed could begin, I think your phrase was, a dangerous downward spiral. You have been, with other European leaders, thinking about the response to those tariffs. But I want to just begin by asking you to draw on your relationship with President Trump and give us your sense of what's happening, what's going on. Why is he pushing this with such intensity? And tell us a little bit about your communications with him over this last week, which you mentioned to me have been by text. But get us started on this crisis with how you see Trump and what's motivating him.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. Much appreciated. I think in diplomacy and foreign policy, you quite often have two tracks. And we focus very much on one track, which is the more traditional diplomatic state-to-state relations, which are based on interests and on values and on geography and history and culture and power and all of those things. And of course, for a country like Finland, which is relatively small, an attachment to the United States has always been important, certainly in sort of modern history. But the second aspect is actually the personal relations. And when you come from a small country, that part is extremely important. So if I, as President of Finland, am able to forge a relationship with the President of the United States on a golf course or otherwise, it's quite useful diplomatically. Having said that, I'm a Finn, which means that I'm also modest. And I really want to sort of push back a little bit on the idea that a president of a small state has an impact on a president of a big state. It's good to have the relationship, but I myself, much like the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre, we see ourselves very much in the back office. And we're just glad that we're able to communicate in good times, in bad times, in crisis times, quite directly.
And as I said earlier, give us a sense of what your text exchange has been.
Good try.
So I just looking for your sense of the temperature of this crisis.
Well, again, when it comes to diplomatic relations, and especially nowadays in the world of signal and otherwise, we have many different groups. We have a lot of information floating around. I think for a small country, especially, information is power. So if you have information that you can share, I'll take an example from the most acute issue for us, which is the war in Ukraine. If I can share a sentiment of what President Zelensky is thinking about to President Trump, and then vice versa, and then I can share that with my European counterparts, that sort of gives you skin in the game. Instead of being just on the chessboard, you can actually become a piece and do things. So this is quite normal diplomacy. Of course, one of the messages was posted quite publicly, which was a consequence of a message that Jonas Gahr Støre, the Prime Minister of Norway, and I, we quite often send joint messages to the President. And then one of the messages was made rather public. I think, was it today or yesterday?
This was about, I don't just want to be the President of Peace or something like that, a reference to
which just shows that it's good that you have direct relations, because you can say, when you have conversations with human beings, you can say things differently in private rather than in public. Therefore, I will not be revealing the content of my messages. Sorry.
Fair enough. We want you to be successful. So let me ask you, without respect to any conversations you've had with President Trump or any European leader, what's your confidence that this can be diffused short of some catastrophic action, whether it's tariffs or worse?
Okay. So I think if you look at it, I'll give you two answers. The first one is, if you look at it analytically in scenarios, right? I think there's a good scenario, there's a bad scenario, and then there's an ugly scenario. The good scenario is that we're able to de-escalate, find an off-ramp, and then strengthen Arctic security within the NATO context. A bad scenario is something which causes a rupture between Greenland and Denmark, who've obviously had a historic relationship, which is forced in one way or another, the result of which we don't know. And of course, the ugly scenario, which no one believes is a military takeover. And we've heard repeatedly also from the US administration that that's not in the cards. Now, that's the analytical sort of conceptual framework. And I think right now in Europe, my second answer, there are two schools of thought. You have one school of thought and leaders, perhaps like myself, who believe that we need to de-escalate, we need to find an off-ramp, we need to explain, we need to have a process, and at the end of the process, we get something, say, in the NATO summit in Ankara next summer. We are the ones who believe that this is essentially an issue of security rather than sovereignty. Then there's another school of thought who says, okay, now there's been a tipping point, and we have to do something about it, which means that there's going to be hard pushback. This could be retaliatory measures, especially on tariffs, which are kind of the only key instruments that you can have, which would have an economic implication. And I think we'll probably be somewhere between the two before this is diffused. And I, of course, hope that we can diffuse the rather complicated situation, here in Davos. And because President Trump is coming here, I think tomorrow or day after. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow, all the most European leaders are going to be here. So, we still have a lot to work with. But this is what diplomacy is all about. And again, I come back. I'm very much a Finn in these. You can't get head up, Sometimes it's good to slow down, go to the sauna, take an ice bath, and then find a solution,
If you could convince President Trump to go to the sauna, I think we'll have achieved something.
From golf diplomacy to sauna diplomacy.
Why
not?
Why not? So let me ask you, just to be contrary, is President Trump right that NATO has not paid enough attention to Greenland's strategic importance? And more broadly, what's your sense of the evolving security challenge in the Arctic?
Sure.
You're on the front line of what Trump is saying is really the zone of greatest confrontation, great power confrontation in the future.
Well, you know that I'm a new NATO member, albeit one of the few people in Finland who've been advocating NATO membership for 30 years. So I'm a little bit reluctant to say whether NATO has been strong enough on the Arctic. But the stronger NATO will be on the Arctic, the better. Finland is one of the 8 countries in the one of the countries in the Arctic Council. Russia, the U.S., Canada, and then the Nordics. We have a lot of Arctic know-how. Our whole military composure is based basically on Arctic defense. We have one of the largest militaries in Europe, together with Turkey, Poland, and Ukraine, but the largest in the Arctic. We have military conscription. 900,000 men and women, including myself and my son, have done our military service. We have reservists who can be called in. In wartime, we can mobilize very quickly 280,000 soldiers for Arctic conditions. We have 62 F-18s. We just bought 64 F-35s, which the first one was rolled out in Texas in December. We have long-range missiles, air, land, and sea. and we have the biggest artillery in Europe together with Poland. And as I always say, we don't have them because we are worried about Sweden. You know, and we have them because we have a capacity to understand what it means to create a deterrent in the Arctic. Now, what do I want to see at the end of this process? Something which Secretary General Mark Rutte has been pushing for, something which the Canadians have been talking about, something which we strongly believe in. We want a stronger Arctic security component for NATO. And the more leadership we have from the United States in doing that, the better. So at the end of this path, I want to see some kind of an Arctic component strategy agreement inside NATO, which makes sure then and gives a clear deterring message, you know, to the likes of Russia.
And I'm assuming that part of that stronger Arctic security framework would be more NATO troops. Let's leave aside which NATO country contributes them.
We'll be there.
In Greenland.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, during the Cold War, the U.S. had a special agreement, I think, from 1951, and something like 17 bases. I don't know the exact number of soldiers that existed there. Now there are a couple of hundred, from what I gather. And I think at the end of the day, what we need is basically stronger NATO bases in Greenland if the Greenlanders and when the Greenlanders want that. So this could be a real positive. And again, you can probably see that I'm an optimist by nature and the rest of it. But look, who would have expected NATO to increase defense expenditure to 5% when we celebrated the 75th anniversary of NATO in Washington 2 years ago? No one would have done that. Who would have expected there to be strong NATO presence in Greenland after complicated discussions? Well, we'll just have to see.
Just one last question about Greenland. I've gone back and looked, as you may have, at that 1951 agreement between the U.S. and Denmark about Greenland. And although it's been amended, the basic premise remains that the United States has the authority under that agreement to add military troops as it sees fit,
Yep.
without restriction on where they're deployed. The U.S. has one base now, but the agreement, interestingly, doesn't limit where they can go.
Is there any other country in the world who has that with another country?
Well, good question. But so would you be comfortable with the U.S. exercising its authority under that agreement to have a stronger military presence in Greenland with NATO's support?
Well, again, that is a decision that has essentially to be taken by Denmark and by Greenland. So I'm not going to give them advice. You also have to understand that we have an extremely close attachment to Nordic cooperation. The five of us, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, are as close as it gets. So whatever Denmark and Greenland decide on this, that's fine with me. If that's the eventual end game in this, I think that's a good thing. There is, if I may add, one thing that people probably don't understand, I probably didn't understand it before all this started, is that Iceland's affinity to Greenland is extremely close. There's an emotional and historical attachment to that. It's linked to their independence and the rest of it. So I think the Nordics are sort of very close in this particular question.
Let's turn now to Ukraine, another subject on which you spent a lot of time, given a lot of thought. As it happens, I just left Ukraine last night, arriving in Poland about 10 o'clock. So, I have a very vivid, recent sense of the stress on Ukraine and on President Zelensky. Give us your sense of where we are. First, in the war itself, whether you see Ukraine after a period where there was concern that it might be weakening, might be under pressure of a breakout in Donetsk, whether it's now holding the line more firmly. And then secondly, where you see President Trump's effort to have a peace agreement heading, whether you think that's still on track, what you think might happen this week when Zelensky and Trump are both here.
Sure. A short answer and a long answer. The short answer is that my big worry for this week is that all of the oxygen in the debate will be taken up by Greenland, which means that Ukraine is sort of on the back burner. And I felt that we've had really good momentum in the negotiations, to be honest, ever since Jared Kushner entered the scene. I think we've been very pragmatic, we've been very result-oriented. We have 2+5 documents that we're dealing with. We have the 20-point plan, we have the security guarantees, we have the prosperity plan, we have a sequencing document, and the rest of it. So I feel that the momentum has been there, but just for the past sort of 10 days, we've lost a little bit of it. Yes, there was a meeting in Miami between the Ukrainians and the Americans, and from what I hear through the grapevine and contacts, is that there was some advancement there, but we are still ways from a deal. I personally hope that President Trump and President Zelensky meet here, but probably the pretext for that will be that something concrete comes out. And I think it's always a little bit of a cat and mouse game here. You know, do we come out with the security guarantees before we come out with a decision on territory? What do we do with the prosperity package? So we'll see where things are moving, because right now, as we can see, there's so many foreign policy things linked to each other. You know, we have the board of peace, we have Ukraine, we have Gaza, we have Iran, we have Venezuela, we have Greenland, and I just hope that this doesn't take too much oxygen away from Ukraine. To simplify, I think militarily, once again, we need to stress the fact that Putin has not achieved his strategic goals. He was supposed to do it in 3 days. We are almost 4 years into the war. His advancement now, 20% of Ukrainian territory in the past 1,000 days, roughly 1% of territory. It's a war of attrition, it's extremely slow, and the human cost is extremely high. So from a military perspective, I feel fairly comfortable where we are, provided that we continue to give military support, as Finland just did in its 31st package last week to Ukraine. Politically, I think we're in a better place, because I feel that we're now on the same page with the Ukrainians, Americans, and the Europeans. And that is very much thanks to a process which kind of started in Geneva right after the G20 meeting, then continued in Berlin with a number of leaders, and then in Paris on the 5th of December. So we're now kind of united in our resolve in trying to find a solution. But then, of course, the big question here is that where's Russia in all of this? And on that, I can't give you an answer. From what I know with the Russians, they'll probably come back and say, "Niet." But, you know, that's a different story.
Come back to Russia in a minute, but to ask one more question, fundamental question about Ukraine. Let's for a moment be skeptical that despite all the good intentions, all the desire to get a peace agreement, it just doesn't happen. Whether because Putin is resistant or for whatever other reason. And then let's imagine that President Trump, as he's often said, decides, I have other things I have to do. I can't keep focusing as much, and so reduces the level of his involvement and that of the U.S. The question that I've been asking myself and asking my readers is, if the U.S. steps back, is Europe ready and able to step forward in a way that would allow Ukraine to continue the fight and to continue holding Russia at bay?
Well, I mean, we work with 3 scenarios. You know, obviously, our brains are churning. We're analyzing. We're taking action. First scenario is that we don't get a peace deal this year, which means that the war of attrition continues. And in this scenario, we expect the United States to continue its support, which obviously has been big. Financially not as big as the European one, but militarily it has been bigger. Now, of course, the pattern is that we kind of buy American stuff and then give it to Ukraine through the, Pearl arrangement, which, is functional. But there are elements which could complicate things, which are linked to intelligence and other things. But of course, the capacity of Ukraine to conduct this war by itself is much better than it was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, or last year. And the capacity of Europe to help. In a good example, we provided the funding for Ukraine by basically giving 90 billion euros for the next 2 years. So we are okay on that front. The second scenario is a peace agreement. And of course, peace agreements, they can be good, bad, or a compromise. They are always a compromise. But that will then create a new scenario as well. What do you do with 1 million Russian soldiers? Well, a lot of them will go to the Finnish border. So there are many different scenarios that we're looking at that case as well. But of course, peace is what we're all working towards. And then the third and final is the worst scenario, which is the one that you were alluding to, that the U.S. would withdraw. I think the U.S. still does work very much on the basis of its self-interests, and there are powers in the United States that believe that it is not in the self-interest from a power or military perspective to endanger this. I do think that the American administration has been working very hard towards this peace, as has President Trump as well.
I just would note as moderator in my conversations yesterday with the new Ukrainian Defense Minister, Fedorov, who has been a leader in Ukraine's use of modern technology, especially drones. I came away with a sense that there are new technologies coming online this year in air defense in particular that will make Ukraine a lot more able to sustain itself. It will make it a lot harder for Russia to just overwhelm Ukraine. So that's just a side note.
I think you're right.
So let's talk about Russia a little bit. Nobody understands Russia, in my experience of quizzing Washington diplomats, better than Finnish diplomats. You live next to them. You have the experience of being at war with them. I'd like to ask you to just share with this group your sense of where Putin is at this point. You've talked to him before becoming president, before the invasion of Ukraine, so you have some personal relationship. He is a mysterious character to a lot of us. Give us just a few sentences of your sense of him, having met him, and whether you see any cracks at all in the Russian elites as this war drags on, and the breakthroughs that Russians, I think, hoped for last year just haven't happened.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big picture is to say that Finland has always survived as Russia's neighbor. I mean, we were part of Russia from 1809 to 1917 when, well, tongue-in-cheek, we gave Russia independence. We declared independence, and since the 1300s, either as part of Sweden or as an independent country, we've had over 30 wars or skirmishes with Russia. But having said that, we've always managed, and Russia has managed with us. I would say that our relationships have been businesslike ever since World War II. For us, the Winter War and the War of continuation. And right now, things are obviously complicated because we don't have a political relationship with Russia. And it's very difficult to have one until the war is over and we find a peace agreement. In terms of personal relations, my closest relationship has been with Sergei Lavrov because we were foreign ministers at the same time, and we kept in touch even after I left politics, and I was supposed to leave politics forever in 2016. And I have met Putin a few times. I think the DNA of Russia is still expansion and imperialism. And I think the driver of Putin is Ruski Mir, Great Russia, which basically means one Russia, one language, one religion, and one leader. I think he still sees the collapse of the Soviet Union as a big travesty. I still believe that we in the West talk a lot about a threat to, the Baltic states or to Finland or to Poland, who are NATO states. I think the more worrying aspect for others is the Central Asian countries, the Southern Caucasus, and others. It's obviously a very top-down system. And I know that President Putin doesn't do, well, certainly not social media, but he doesn't do any electronic devices. So that then gives you a framework of the scope of the information flow that he has. And if I look at it from a Russian perspective, and if the Russians were honest to themselves, none of their strategic goals have succeeded. What did Putin want? He wanted to take over Ukraine. He made Ukraine European. He wanted to split NATO. He actually got 2 additional members, Sweden and Finland. He wanted to split the transatlantic partnership. Well, someone might say there are cracks in it, but I still believe in the long run hasn't happened. He wanted to split Europe. It's more united than ever. He wanted to keep defense expenditure down. We're now all going to 5%. So, things are not going his way. Economically, we're looking at interest rates and inflation, in the teens. We're looking at an economy which has 0 growth this year. We're looking at an economy which doesn't have any more reserves. We're looking at an economy which has to pay an excessive amount of what we call Putin's maternity package, so over $100,000 for a dead soldier to the families. And you have to ask the question, how long is this sustainable? I think what might turn it are actually the oligarchs. When they notice that this is it, then we could get a stop to this. But it's very difficult to predict.
Do you see any such beginning of fragmentation in that oligarch elite?
Yeah, in public opinion you don't, but in oligarchs you only sort of second guess what you hear in the corridors, and it's hard to say.
So we've got a couple minutes left. I want to ask you one quick question and then a little longer one. So I've read that President Trump invited you to be on his international board of peace.
Yeah.
And I want to ask first, what do you think? Are you interested in doing it? And second, I'd like to ask you to address the concern that's been in a number of analyses the last couple of days, which is this may be an attempt to create an alternative structure to the United Nations itself. So, A, would you be willing to join? B, is there that risk that it'd be another separate form?
Is this when I do my book promotion at the same time?
Saving that for last.
Okay. So, first of all, my take is that the world order is changing. A lot of the multilateral institutions are being challenged. My answer to it has been a traditional liberal internationalist approach is to strengthen the multilateral institutions, especially the UN. How do you do that? You do it by giving more agency to the players who feel that it was a construction of the victors of World War II and bigger powers in the 1970s. So double the membership of the UN Security Council, bring in at least one country from Latin America, 2 from Africa, 2 from Asia, etc., etc. I have also thought that what we're missing right now in this sort of interim period is peace mediation coming from the UN. And we need peace mediation, which is long-standing. Therefore, I think that the idea of a peace board is a good one. Then the direct question, we are looking into it, as many of our European friends are. We feel that there should be a strong UN mandate. In the Gaza case, of course, there is, but that went the reverse way. First you go in, and then you get a mandate. And we would feel it goes the other way around.
So you'd feel if this Board of Peace had some kind of UN sanction, you'd feel comfortable with it?
I would look at it from a legal perspective. We need parliamentary approval because it's an international organization. I would look at who of my counterparts are joining. And of course, needless to say, we're all working on this in the background. So I don't reject the essential idea.
So last question, the name of the book, it's always important to mention the names of books when you're with the authors, is The Triangle of Power, Rebalancing the New World Order. A good title. The parts of the triangle are the global West, the global South, the global East. I'm not so sure that the global West is still an operative phrase, but in that book, you I believe, right, that you think the core of NATO will not be weakened. You wrote that a little while ago. Would you make that same statement with that same confidence today?
Yeah, definitely. I think, even if globalization is on retraction, what you're going to see is regional organizations increasing in strength. That's why I think that an organization like the European Union, which will become increasingly flexible for sure, will actually have a competitive advantage to the rest of the world because they're able to cooperate within. And I think right now NATO, it might obviously change its composure, but no international organization is constant. I think the original task of NATO from 1949 to the end of the Cold War was to work as a deterrent to the Soviet Union. Then it became more of a crisis management, peace-making organization in Afghanistan, in Kosovo, and elsewhere. And then after Russia attacked Ukraine, it was rejuvenated again. So we're in NATO 3.0. I think the basic idea of a strong defense, a deterrence based on conventional forces, on missiles, and on nukes is still there. And I still believe in American engagement and commitment in it. So I would, yes, say that NATO is not going to change.
So, ladies and gentlemen, President Alexander Stubb, I would say 300-yard drive. Thank you very much.